we'll get started. Welcome to the ordinary meeting of this council to deliberate on our water meter charging. And we'll start with the keeper. Conflicts of interest? No conflict of interest. Apologies. We have an apology from Councillor Lennox and we have Councillor Helena. Somebody move the apology from Councillor Lennox. Moved by Councillor Bay, seconded Councillor Johnson. All in favour?
Aye.
Thank you. No one in public forum, no late items, no confirmations of minutes or reports. So we go straight to reports for decision, which is on page 6. It's the water meter charge and deliberations report. And Steph, are you going to be the one in charge here?
Kia ora koutou. So this report presents Council with the summary of submitter feedback on the draft revenue and financing policy and rates remission policy, which were consulted on as part of a proposed water meter charging approach. Our consultation period was open for a 1-month period, just closing on Friday, the 13th of December, and overall 167 submissions were received, which includes one late submission, which is provided as attachment 3 to your report. The community was invited to have their say on a proposed charging approach for the urban water supply service, which would shift from the current rates-based approach, which is based on a targeted service charge and CV rate, to a combination of a targeted service charge and introducing volumetric charging. The proposal was to transition the approach in over a 3-year period, so that by the end of that 3 years there would be a 50-50 split between the targeted services charge and the volumetric charge. Properties would also receive an annual water allowance, which was proposed to be 225 cubic metres per year by the end of the 3-year transition, and there would be an opportunity for council to monitor the impacts over the transition and review this as part of annual plan processes. So overall, 59 submitters supported that proposed charging approach, 16% supported an alternative approach, and 24% supported retaining the status quo. Feedback on the alternative charging approach varied. Some submitters wanted council to transition more quickly or to a higher volumetric charge or user pays approach, while some had other suggestions around the annual water allowance or retaining some CV portion. So a summary of key themes from the submission is provided in the report for you. Council also consulted on 3 remission proposals, those related to high use from households in financial hardship, and 2 proposals relating to water leaks. The proposals relating to water leaks were well supported by submitters, with 72% supporting proposal 2, which related to some temporary financial assistance to help with repairing a water leak, and there was 84% supported a water remission for excess consumption due to a water leak. Feedback on the water leak remission proposals included some comments around that water contribution amount, as well as the leak timeframe for repair, which is highlighted in your report. Proposal 1, which related to high water use from households in financial hardship, was supported by 43% of submitters. So while many submitters did comment on affordability, some had concerns that this was inconsistent with a user pay approach, or that it might be a central government responsibility. So staff have provided some specific commentary around this proposal, as well as some of the other matters highlighted by submitters in your report. And just noting, the remission proposals would also require council to set a budget for this through the annual plan process. So today we are seeking the adoption of these policies to introduce the water meter charging approach, or for direction from council for us to go away and undertake some additional work to present revised policies back to your February 2025 council meeting for consideration. If adopted, the charging approach would start coming into effect from 1 July 2025, so next year. Happy to take questions.
Okay, it's question time now, and I would ask that you just make sure that you are asking questions rather than making comments. The comments come during the deliberation. So, questions for Steph. Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, just one question I have is, moving forward, is it possible that the water meter system that we're rolling out could have an app for the program so that, a bit like electricity, so that water users can check their usage on a regular basis?
I'll allow Maz to respond to that one.
Yes, it is possible. We haven't actually found the technology that we want to close the gap in terms of how the smart meters currently operate and how we'd like them to operate. So there is some discovery work for us to do there, but the ideal solution will be that it's more automated, it comes with an app and people can see what their daily usage is.
Just another question too. We've got three suggestions in the rates remission policy, two of which are aimed at those that incur high volumetric water charges. My question would be that by offering remissions for high volumetric water charges, do you think that we're not encouraging conserving water and better usage of the treasure?
Oh yeah, I don't think it is encouraging conservation.
Yeah. I just wanted to make that point.
Councillor Bowyer, then Councillor Goodwin.
Steve, thank you for your report. A couple of times I noted you used the words annual allowance. So is that the case that after I use my annual allowance, I am then charged for water? Or
Yeah, so the proposed rate would be a $2 per cubic metre.
So if I go 8 months and use my allowance at 8 months, I'm then charged after it? So I'm not charged if I go over it monthly or what?
I believe it would be quarterly. Is that correct?
I think the way that we'd do it is you'd have a monthly, your annual would be split by a month and it's sort of use it or lose it.
So it's a monthly allowance, not an annual allowance?
It would be a monthly allowance.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Goodwin.
The amount of remission, and we touched on this yesterday, does it, in the local water's done well, there's a proposal to have 1% of revenue put aside for that. I'm just wondering if one of the purposes of this discussion is to get us to the local water's done well position. So I'm just asking, what's the quantum that would be budgeted for cases of hardship, and 1%, for instance, would be 140k.
So we'd need to, there will be a consideration as part of the annual plan process for council to consider. We would need to do some additional work on that in consideration once we have the proposals confirmed, so that we could provide some more advice around that.
Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, I see there's a suggestion of a remission financial assistance for people experiencing water leaks. Personally, water leaks above the ground I think are obvious. Would this financial assistance just be for water leak assistance for water leaks under the ground?
I would expect it to be for all water leaks.
Councillor Bowyer.
I see that in the first year the water allowance is very high. Is this an attempt at an amnesty basically to help them educate and get people used to what we are trying to do?
Yeah, it was intended to help support a transition approach for our community to start learning and making adjustments for their behaviour. It also reflects the current situation where we are aware that there is quite a lot of high use or potentially water leaks undetected. We're unclear exactly how that looks, but it was intended to provide that support over a transition.
Councillor Johnson.
There's still a little bit of a grey area with regards to shared meters. And so my question is, can you clarify how they will be charged? And also, is there a possibility in the future to address that?
So we've noted in the report that we're intending to bring advice to council in February on the approach for implementing the approach for shared properties. So we'll be able to respond specifically to that point.
Further questions?
Is Tom's hand up?
Oh, sorry, Councillor Helena?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Steph, what's the assumption with this new volumetric charging regarding water usage for those households and businesses that will be facing lower charges as a result of this change? What's the assumption around their water usage? Do you think they will use, as their price falls, will they use more water? And if so, how many households and businesses will be facing lower charges as a result of this pricing change?
I don't have the specific figures on the number of households that would, because we're unable to know what their water usage would be. The impact will be really dependent on what their current CV rate is combined with their usage, which could vary from property to property. We've included some examples in the consultation material in terms of likely impact for households, but it does depend on how all users change their behaviour over the course of the transition.
Yeah, so are we assuming that given households will now be charged per unit over a certain amount, we're making the assumption that that's going to reduce water usage? Am I correct?
That's the goal, yes.
Yes, and so conversely then, we're not saying that where the cost of water is less for a number, and if we look at the graphs that you've presented in the consultation and some of the graphs that weren't in the consultation that we saw previously, where households and businesses will now be facing less water charge, is it not reasonable to assume that they will then use more water?
I couldn't comment on that because I'm unsure of their current water use, but there would be an opportunity for council to review that allocation to ensure that it is set at an appropriate amount. And so if you did see households using more water than you were anticipating or expecting, there would be an opportunity to revisit that allowance figure.
Okay, and so I guess my last question then is, given we haven't done the quantitative measurement on who or how many connections are going to face lower costs compared to those that will face higher costs, it's a bit of guesswork as to whether or not this process will reduce water consumption.
I think it's well demonstrated in councils that have introduced water meters that there is a reduction, and it's been seen quite widely for those councils that have, so I'd be expecting a similar result for Masterton.
Okay, thank you, Steph.
Right, Councillor Bowyer, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Bowyer.
So under Proposal 1, remission for households experiencing financial hardship for incurred high volumetric water charges, are we just talking about remission for the cost of the water or remission for the connection fee?
It would be only the volumetric charge.
Okay, so it would only be 50% of the bill?
At the moment it was proposed discretion up to 100%, but that's for councillors to debate and consider. Yep.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Further to Councillor Helena's comment, the daily allocation is still very high, especially compared to other areas. You quoted some in the paper. I would have expected it to be lower, given that we're trying to encourage behaviour change and conserve water. Is the likelihood that further down the track the daily allotment will be less?
So by the end of the 3-year transition period, the proposed allocation is quite similar to what we have in Masterton and South Wairarapa, but there would be an opportunity for councillors to review that later down the track. Yep.
Councillor Nelson.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Steph and Maz. I've got quite a few questions. Am I correct? So it's 4,400 litres per household per day. That's what we're starting on.
On the first year of the transition, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And so that applies to regardless of how many people are living in the house, doesn't it? It's just per household per day.
Yes, yeah.
Has there been, just following on from Craig's point, it kind of does look like an amnesty. I didn't realise how high it was until I just read that this morning, actually. Following on from the submission from Mark Julian yesterday, has there been any thought to actually having an actual amnesty based around no figures? And following on from Councillor Helena's point as well, it could be a situation, do you think there could be a situation, I'll make it a question, in which people, realising they've got so much water, will choose to use that water? And have we thought about actually doing an actual amnesty where we just see what happens for a year and we just collect all the data that we possibly can around how it's used, and then we might find we can set even a lower target or a higher target and just measure what people are actually doing. Do you see my point? It's kind of related to Mark's one yesterday.
So, yeah, so I think initially when we brought this to council, we received direction that they wanted to implement a charging approach from 1 July 2025. So we have designed a transition period to support that, which we considered would be the most appropriate transition for households. I think the timing would be up for consideration and debate by council.
Yep. And how was the 4,400 litres calculated? What's it worked out around?
So it was based on current consumption and looking at properties, and we recognised there was quite a high number of high users, even over 5,000 litres per day. So it was trying not to over penalise or, introduce a huge impact for those households that are using a high amount of water, either of genuine use or undetected leaks, and we assume some of it would be leaks. So providing that opportunity for households to adjust their behaviour, repair leaks before the amount is reduced.
With the $300, I don't really know much about this sort of thing, but what sort of cost would someone be looking at for that sort of fix? I mean, it will probably vary household by household, but what would you, if someone had a leak in their, whatever it is between the street and their house, what sort of cost would you be looking at? Or is it impossible to tell?
Yeah, so there'd be lots of variables there. So if you were maybe fixing some washers on taps and, smaller leaks, $300 would probably do it.
Yep.
But if you were having to, dig up a pipe or try to detect where the leak was, $300 would be a contribution to that, but it wouldn't be 100% of what you'd be paying.
Yep. Thank you. When we have summer water restrictions and people have essentially paid for their water, would those restrictions still be in place? So if someone's got access to the expectation is 4,400 litres per day, and so would that restriction, that would change if we had water restrictions, wouldn't it?
So people were charged based on their usage. I don't think that 4,000 litres is a target. That's sort of a threshold. But we would still implement summer water restrictions as needed.
So summer water restrictions would sort of override that.
Yeah, well, they'd still have the same allocation, but the restrictions are how they can use that allocation, obviously.
So the odd numbers, even numbers would sort of come out of play because people, if they were sticking within their limits, then that would be essentially the restriction, wouldn't it? You would have extra ones imposed upon them, like we do in summer. We've just got handhold systems.
Yeah.
We would still have those in place.
Yep. But how would that relate to the 4,400 litres per day?
So they would still be charged at that per cubic metre if they exceeded that litre per day. We would expect in a summer restriction period that they wouldn't, so then they wouldn't have that additional incurred cost, essentially.
So you could still use that 4,400 litres per day whenever you want, because that's a restriction that's been placed upon you.
But you'd still be required to comply with the summer restrictions.
Yep.
Yep, that's it for now. Thank you, Councillor Nelson. Councillor Johnson.
Because one of the goals of rolling out water meters is to change behaviour, will an education process run alongside the rollout?
I would expect so. Yes, I would expect so, that there would be. This sort of was the start of a approach, but I think we already have communications around water conservation, and there would be, I would expect us to do more on that as this is rolled out.
And we probably want to do something on an annual basis when you have the opportunity to review the process and limits also.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions here from Carol yesterday, one of our submitters, who was, would the tenant or property owner be expected to pay the water charge?
Property owner, we're legally able to bill a property owner who would be responsible for the charges.
Okay, thank you. And the other one was to do with the potential burden on businesses who are high water users and also pay high rates. Has that been looked at in this? That was obviously looked at in the policy.
So at the moment, I think a lot of the businesses do have a high CV rate already, which is reflected in their charge. So I think it would depend on their high use, their usage amount, in terms of where the charge would impact them. But we haven't proposed a different allowance based on whether you're a commercial property or a residential property.
Councillor Johnson.
Following on from that though, their current water fee will reduce.
For some, yes. It depends on their current CV and their usage, so it's really hard to say for an individual.
Councillor Tutor, Councillor Nelson, Councillor Goodman.
Thank you, Steve. In the documentation, it states that people will be given to have water leaks. At the moment, it's very hard to get a builder, so I imagine it will be hard to get hold of a plumber this bill, particularly when this water meters kick in. So, is there any thought to giving a longer time or letting people register that yes, we've tried to get a plumber and so will we be given an amnesty?
Yeah, so the proposal was 1 month, but it did provide discretion in situations where evidence is provided that an appropriate repairing service could not be obtained within that time frame, but that is up for consideration by councillors as part of the deliberations.
Thank you.
Councillor Nelson.
Oh, sorry. Just stay during for a second, I think.
Pardon?
Question. Did you want to speak?
No, I wrote down Nelson.
Oh, okay, I just lost track of what I was going to say.
Sorry, Tom. Councillor Goodwin.
Just looking, my question is about the commercial people looking at David Harris's rates examples, charges where the average shop will, their rates will drop 2,200 and a large retailer, and that's 7.7 million valuation, so they're not that huge, will drop 28,000, and I would have thought that's to be celebrated that these people have been overcharged forever, in most cases, for the water they use, and they're going to get some long overdue relief.
I think overcharge might be an overstatement. It's charged in line with the current policy, yeah.
Councillor Johnson.
One of the goals of rolling out water meters is to avoid people subsidising others and it's a user pays implementation. And yet in this paper there's a significant rates remission policy which is expected to be funded by ratepayers, which to me is a dichotomy because we're saying you pay for any excess water you use from here moving forward, and yet we're saying we're going to put some money aside for ratepayers for the rates remission for people who aren't actually conserving water or monitoring their usage. I'd be interested in your take on that.
Yeah, I think the proposed approach was trying to balance that water conservation, but also trying to minimise impacts for those with less affordability to pay. And the proposed remission was intended to support that, but that's up for council to discuss.
Can I do a follow-up? Follow-up question on that would be, at the moment, people with working for families and also people with community services cards can benefits probably not quite the right word, but central government looks after them with financial hardship. Do you think that by us also playing that role, there are two opportunities to acknowledge that?
Potentially, and there was some recognition from submitters in the feedback around central government contribution.
Yeah.
Councillor Helena, then Councillor Goodwin, then Councillor Nelson. Councillor Helena.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just got a question around a landlord. If a landlord has a block of flats, say 4 to 6 flats, the landlord will pay the water connection, but possibly on charge to the tenants, I'm assuming. If the landlord has multiple leaks and is on charging that to the tenants, is there a mechanism to sort of manage that?
It would be up to the tenant and the landlord and through their tenancy agreement to discuss water charges. I don't think council is able to get involved, but it would be the responsibility of the landlord. They have the legal responsibility to pay the water charges as well as to repair the leaks. So the responsibility sits with the landlord, the property owner.
So the responsibility sits with the landlord to pay the water, but there's no requirement to ensure that they fix the leaks that I'm aware.
There is a requirement to repair leaks. Yeah.
How will that be checked and enforced?
So it comes under we have a water supply bylaw that requires the repair of detected leaks. So there are enforcement provisions available through that in terms of prosecution, for example, if needed.
But do we have a mechanism to detect the leaks, is my question, I suppose.
Yes, we have an operational process in place, which is around identifying a high use. And then we do site inspections, and then we advise the property owners.
So with a landlord with, say, a block of 6 flats, we'd have some idea of what would be the typical water usage, and then if we thought that was higher than the typical or norm, you'd do some checks. Is that what you're saying will happen?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. And just in line with Councillor Goodwin's comment or question around, commercial entities will be paying far less for their water. The water still has to be paid for. Where does the burden of that water now fall?
So we'd be moving to a more user pays approach. So it would be people who are using a higher amount would be charged more.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Councillor Goodwin.
Something that was raised yesterday was what happens if someone refuses to pay their bill or whatever. How do you obviously don't cut the water off, or have people dying from lack of water. Why not cut it off? How do you manage that? And I know electricity, well, I suspect electricity suppliers have a similar issue, but so what do you do if the bill's not paid, it goes on and on, they won't pay, won't respond? What do you do?
So my understanding, and Maz might be able to contribute, is that under the Water Services Act you are unable to entirely cut off supply. You can restrict the flow of the supply if there are unpaid charges, but you still need to provide a sufficient quantity of water so that they can undertake sanitary needs and have available drinking water.
So that's
That's
all.
exactly right.
Yep, that's cool.
Councillor Nelson.
Thanks again. How difficult will it be, I'm not sure if it's a question for you guys, for someone to apply for a race permission? Is it like a really easy thing to do? Do you just walk in, fill in a form, and then it's approved, or is there quite a long process to do it?
I think it would be a standard application process, yeah.
But is it easy?
I think we would try and make it as easy as we could.
And the other question is, when will all the households be online with their water meters? What would the time frame for that be, do you expect?
Our target at this point is 30 June of next year.
Oh, yeah, so everything, hopefully, 30th of June.
Hopefully 30 June.
Thank you.
Councillor Bowyer, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Tutor.
The Wainawa Industrial Estate. It is in Carterton's district, correct? Yes? Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. We are talking here of a $2 volumetric charge. Is that to be applied and charged to Carterton as well?
I'm not sure of what the specific arrangements we have in place are, but we could follow up and come back to you on that unless anybody else is aware.
Unless there's a particular agreement in place, I don't see why they'd be treated any different to anyone else in the district.
Yeah, so there is no possibility that the ratepayers of Masterton will be subsidising the ratepayers of Carterton.
Sorry, Councillor, there's an arrangement in place where we supply water to the Masterton District Council through the pipes across to the Wainawa Industrial. Their policies will apply for the water that they supply in that area, and we'll continue on the process of our current billing until we negotiate new terms with Masterton District Council. So, and I would expect that would be sooner than later.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson and Councillor Tutor. Councillor Goodwin.
We've already established that there are some very high users and some anomalies in Masterton. Can you confirm that they will be targeted now, so prior to June 25, so that we can determine whether they're leaving the taps running or whether there's a leak problem?
Yes, definitely. We're working on that now.
Councillor Tutor.
I remember reading in one of the submissions that for people who have swimming pools, they're obliged to allow the fire brigade to use the water. So will they be charged to refill their pool if the pool is being used for a service, community service?
I'm not sure the policy goes into those specifics, but they'd be extraordinary circumstances, and we would look at each of those cases on its merits.
Thank you.
Councillor Goodwin.
Yeah, further from Councillor Bowyer's question, that water we supply to Carterton, when's that policy up for renewal? It sounds like at the moment we sort of have I don't know, I suppose you'd call it harmonisation policy, whereas I'm just curious when we get to maybe address it.
I'm not sure on the exact date, but I would be quite keen to try to align that with these changes, but I would be taking direction from the CE.
Because in a way, I'll say this for David's benefit, that it sort of sounds like if you know the history of Masterton and this area, that gravel pit just across the bridge made money by selling it to all the other counties for decades and decades, and it's a wee bit similar.
Councillor Goodwin, any further questions? Okay, if there's no further questions, we'll move to the recommendations on page number 6, and I'm going to put these in parts. So the first recommendations I'm going to put are 1, 2 and 3. We note that the Council has been provided with a full set of submissions on the water meter charging approach as part of the hearings report. We received the late submission from Sustainable Wairapa and we consider the community feedback and advice from staff. Could I have a move that we move Councillor Bay, second to Councillor Goodman? Any discussion on that? I'll put the motion. All in favour, say aye.
Aye.
All against, carried. We now go to 4, which is an either or. Is somebody prepared to move the either or the or? You moved, Councillor Tudor. What do you? Are you moving the?
Either.
One second.
And moved by Councillor Tudor, seconded by Councillor Johnson. So we're mentioning the either. Is there any discussion on that? Yes, Councillor Nelson.
Yeah. Is there any possibility that we can actually, there's been so many questions asked today and so much uncertainty, why not do what Mark Juling said and get really great data for what's happening over the next year? And like Maz said, we're still waiting for all the network to be installed and upgraded and done, and just push it out and collect quality data and just see what people actually do when they start using their water meters. And it's only going to, they were installed, I think, before I even started on council in 2019. So why not collect really good data, get rid of a lot of the assumptions that we're making, because we've all got assumptions and we've got so many questions, and just see what will happen if people are kind of educated. I understand Craig's point, where it's almost a trial anyway, an amnesty, because the levels are so high. But you've got Tom's point as well, where people might realise they've got so much more water in a one-person household, they'll start using it. So we could just see what would happen over the course of a period of time and collect really good quality data. So is there any consideration around that? Was that something that we can do? It's been so long anyway. We've effectively got an amnesty, and then we could even, when we actually do this, we could reduce that amount from 4,400 litres to a more realistic amount based on what we actually know, not just this really high level that we're giving to all households.
Do we have any opposite answer to that? Or? Okay. Thank you. Councillor Holmes?
Yes, I agree with Tim, believe it or not. Oh, God. Yes, I do.
It's happened eventually.
I think we're being too soft. Personally, I think we're being too soft. I think the figures of 4,400 is too high. I've lived on a restricted water supply since 1982, and there's 50 people on that supply. We have never had a problem. We run out of water occasionally. If there's a leak on the supply chain to what happens with our scheme, the scheme supplies it to the tank of the farmer. It finishes there. If there's a break between the farmer's tank and the scheme line, the scheme fixes it. If it's on the farmer's line, he fixes it. And I think it sounds so complicated what you're doing. I just can't believe it. It's so complicated what you're doing. If you use 1,000 litres a day, you pay for 1,000 litres a day. If you go over, you pay over. I'll use an example of my daughter, Masterton. They've been restricted. They put a new house in lawn in. They got an account for too much water. I saw my granddaughter cleaning her teeth the other night, and she turned the tap off, and I said, "What are you up to?" And she said, "My parents have told me to do this." And that's all about education. Masterton, they've been on meters for ages. South Roper, they've had the odd hiccup, but nothing major. But what they did find that most of the leaks were on council pipes. So I just think we need to keep it simple, and I'd like to see, I don't agree, I'll be honest with you, I don't agree with the regulations we're putting in here. And I think there should be a chance for an amnesty, but I'd actually give an amnesty for 1 year. I'd reduce it from 3 to 1 and start from there. People will soon learn, I tell you now.
I'll get Karen to respond.
Sorry, I shouldn't be responding in the middle of deliberations, but it was something that we should have picked up earlier on, is that the discussions that we've had and the experience from other councils is that until that charging policy is in place, behaviour doesn't change because it's not actually hitting people's wallets. And so it will either not change or not change sufficiently for us to be able to get that good data. So that was why we proposed this model, in that we would start charging but have it so that people still would not be shocked with a big difference in charging policy.
Okay, Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, my point is that if we were to have this system in place and tell people what they would have been charged based on their behaviours, not do nothing, but give them, okay, this is what you've done for the year, this is what would have happened if you had behaved in this particular way, and this is the education process. And then people, we kind of agree and kind of don't. You now know what would happen based on your behaviours, based on the policies we have in place. Because essentially we're hoping that we're not going to have to charge anyone anyway, are we? With such high levels at 4,400 litres per day, that's incredibly high. I think in Auckland it's 150 litres per person per day. People use
240.
Yeah. So that's still remarkably high, but we have this opportunity to really educate our community with what would happen. Not just tell them this is the sort of things you should be doing, give them no actual feedback on that, give them the feedback of the actual costs.
Tim. Councillor Goodwin, Councillor Johnson, Councillor Helena.
I'll disagree with that opinion and actually echo the officer's comment that this has been rolled out around the world actually, and it's well understood and well known, and this is simply a gentle transition. Why rush into it? Slide into it over 3 years and voila.
Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, I'd be interested in Robin's take on this, given his background and also he's had experience with water meters otherwise. So would you mind sharing what your thoughts are?
You might like me beforehand, you probably won't like me afterwards.
We always like it, Robin.
I'll go straight for the jugular and actually start charging.
Probably not.
The reality is that, in my opinion, you are pussyfooting around a big conversation. You just need to get on with it. And, I think the best thing you have to do is visualise what 1,000 litres of water looks like and put $2 against that big plastic container with 1,000 litres. And Auntie, if the fire department come around and they pumped out somebody's swimming pool and they might have had a 20,000 litre swimming pool, it's only $40. It's still cheaper than a bucket of KFC. The reality is that at $2 a cubic metre, the water is cheap. People just have to be educated. The real issue coming out of water will be the sewerage and the repairs to the stormwater and sewerage that needs to happen over 3/4 of a generation. And that's where the real cost, I believe, will be for the incoming CCO. So, to me, you've got an AOG to set up a potential CCO, whichever model it is. I think waiting for that to get 3 years down the track, I would actually be trying to get that CCO done as soon as agreement is arised out of it. But the reality is, even if all the meters aren't in, you should still be charging for people to use the water. The education program, you have to tell between the 59 large users per day and up to 120-30 households, they need to be told first. And once those water usage goes down, all the more better. What happens in Auckland if you are negligent in paying your water rates bill, and I have been a number of times, the council comes around, they put a big lock over your meter and your tap, and they turn it down and they make sure you've got water coming out of your hose tap. So by law, they have to still provide you with 50 litres a day. And so that's the bare minimum of water. But at $2 a cubic metre, it's still cheaper than a latte, which is a cup of water. It's very simple. And we have to have a mindset change in New Zealand on how we use our resources. And that's it in a nutshell. And the sooner we get there, the better. take.
Thank you very much, Robin. We've now got Councillor Helena.
Yeah, I just want to speak to 4A. That's on track, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with a lot of what's been said. It's a human right to have access to water, in my view. It's a basic need. It's a survival need. Everybody needs to have right to water. But it's also a human responsibility to manage it sustainably. So essentially, I'm very supportive of what we're trying to achieve here. I'm not supportive of 4A because the burden of this shift is heavily falling on the low and medium income homes. If we assume that low and medium value homes are reflective of low and medium income, and that's going to be further exacerbated, as Councillor Pōtangaroa just mentioned, when we have to start charging people for the actual infrastructure costs, and particularly if the Masterton low-income, medium-income ratepayers have to foot the bill for higher water volume charges, and then they have to foot the bill for infrastructure charges, and then depending on which model we choose, they end up footing the bill by subsidising their rich cousins in Martinborough, Greytown and Carterton. And so my concern is the burden of this change is falling heavily on those who are least able to pay for it. And I think we need to relook at the charging model. I'm a big fan of a volumetric charge, but when it's a 50% targeted service charge and a 50% volumetric charge, the burden falls heavily on the poor, those who are least able to pay for it. And so Councillor Goodwin just talked about a commercial outfit, a high-value commercial outfit, possibly paying $27,000 less for their water. Well, where's that going to be made up from? We know it's going to be made up from the low and middle income people in our community. And I strongly advise that we look closely at changing the revenue and financing policy so it does include some CV component. So the burden of this change is not falling on those that are least able to pay for it. And we know that's going to be exacerbated when the local water's done well model is brought into play. So I strongly recommend that we look at some alternative as opposed to 4A.
Thank you, John. Councillor Goodman.
I just want to challenge Councillor Tom's statements in that we had, at the beginning of this term, we had Tania stand up and show us a slide, I can't remember what it was, that less than 1% of property owners suffered financial hardship. Property owners. And they are the people who we are talking about. Generally, people who own properties do not suffer financial hardship, according to the research that Tania put before us. So I would say that yes, there is poverty and distress in our community, but from what I'm told by our officers, it's not property owners. And so they are the ones paying this. So I'm not worried about the fact that this burden is shifting. And I mean, in fact, of course, the higher value properties have been subsidising the lower value ones for many years, and it's going to change. And it will cause lumps. And council will look at its revenue and rating policy, maybe to compensate or something in some way, but that's a decision for the future. This is simply changing the way we charge for water. And I totally support it. So they limit the use of it, and it'll educate and make people's attitude to the use and wastage of it, much better.
Councillor Nelson.
Just that 1% comment, I think it depends on how you define a property owner. Like if you own a house and you've got a large mortgage, you're still going to be under massive financial pressure. If you own a house with no mortgage, that 1%, they're probably fine. But someone who's just bought a house, that's a completely different picture, in my view.
Thank you. Councillor Holmes.
I'd just like to tell you that the cost of water in our scheme is $447 a cubic metre, plus a connection fee. So our $2 a cubic metre is absolutely nothing. It's not even touching the rims of a tank. And I just firmly believe that whatever we do, if we have a blanket cost of water at this stage is $2 across everybody that uses a litre of water, people will soon learn how to use it and how to save it. And I don't believe in the CV. I think that should be dropped, and everybody is on the same level, and you know where you are. And that's my opinion. I think you're making it so complicated. You're getting screwed up about it. And it's
Councillor Helena.
I'd just like to acknowledge Councillor Goodwin. First time I've heard him agree with council officers' opinions.
Hallelujah.
Thank you very much, Councillor Helena.
turn around as well.
Okay, look, I have a move Councillor Tita, Councillor Johnson, that we support the either clause on 4, which is to agree to the proposed charging approach as outlined in the consultation document and revenue and finance policy, 50% targeted service charge, 50% volume charge by the end of the 3-year transition period, and adopts the revenue and financing policy. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 Against?
Yes.
So we will have a show of hands. All those in favour, raise your right hand. There is 5. Against? There are 3.
Yeah.
That is passed.
Mr Mayor, could I have my vote recorded, please?
Absolutely.
Division.
Pardon?
I think he wants a division.
No, he just said he votes recorded. He wants his vote recorded.
Did you want a division, councillor?
Let's call it division.
Okay, thank you. We now move on to 5. And again, we've got the either ors. So is somebody prepared to move the recommendations here? I was just wondering that because we just need advice from officers here that whether we could have the discussion before we move the recommendations, because I think the discussion here is going to be interesting.
I'm happy to move the or.
Are you happy to move the or?
Yeah, and then discuss.
Happy to move the or to get staff to undertake further work.
Yeah.
And I'll second that.
Okay,
And I'll-
Councillor Johnson, second Councillor Holmes.
And I'll explain.
Yep. you
Yeah.
can now speak to it.
Okay, so I'm not happy with the remission suggestions because I feel that if people are in working families or have community card or any other kind of thing that's recognised through central government, and I don't think that we should recognise that again because it's like, I don't want to phrase it badly, but it's like 2 discounts with the one product rather than 1 discount for the one product. But I also don't feel that our ratepayers should be further subsidising other ratepayers when we're trying to bring in user pays. So people have to change their behaviours, and also too, I don't think this encourages people to change their behaviours if they're assuming that they'll get a rates remission by continuing to use high volumes of water. The other thing with point 2, which is about the temporary financial assistance, whilst I appreciate that that's helping with the bills, I believe that that should only be if it's instigated for underwater leaks, because people should have a responsibility and be aware of any other leaks now. We all know if we've got a dripping tap or it doesn't shut off properly or we're misusing water and leaving things running. So that's a point I'd like to make, and I don't believe that we should be subsidising rate remissions for volumetric water charging.
Councillor Holmes, do you want to
I know,
add anything?
I fully agree, actually. I think the one big word we need to think of today is education.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Nelson.
Yeah, I do like number one, proposal one, because that is, I mean, the last thing didn't go the way I wanted it, but this does encourage education, and I know that there'll be people that might not, there'll always be some people that don't do things the way they should be done, but this just at least allows for that period of time in which you can sort the way you use your water out.
So do you want someone to move?
Well, we've already moved the ore part.
Oh, okay, all right. You get out.
So can I just
down
get...
the ore road.
Yeah, Councillor, yeah. This is discussion.
Yeah, it was one of the interesting, if you look through all the submissions, there was quite a bit of discussion from the submitters around the remission, and there seemed to be a lot of confusion as to how it was going to work, how it was going to be implemented. I myself am reasonably happy with actually proposal 2 and 3. It was just proposal 1. But that got answered the question when it was going to be they would still have to pay the connection fee. So I'm actually reasonably happy with the remission policy.
Thank you. Any further? Councillor Goodwin.
Can I just signal when Councillor Johnson's ore's been voted on that I'm going to move the recommended 5.
You're going to move the either.
Yes.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Tom. Councillor Helena.
I support the rates remission, and for the reasons previously stated. I think this policy falls heavily on low to medium income homes and families, and I believe water is a basic right for everybody. We cross-subsidise all over the place in council, and for very good reasons. We do it in our tax system. We do it because, we want people to have a reasonable standard of living and a reasonable life. And so for me, it's the right thing to be doing is to have a rates remission policy or process. So I fully support that. In terms of a comment made that, people who might be deserving a rates remission or on a community services card are already getting a handout, and why should we give them another handout? They're getting a handout because they're on the bones of their arse, and they find it hard to survive. And this not including a rates remission is just going to make it that much harder.
Thank you, Councillor Helena. Is there any further discussion before I put the first motion? Okay, I'm going to put the first motion, which is the OR, which is direct staff to undertake further work on the rates remission policy proposals and present a revised rates remission policy to the February 25 council meeting for adoption. All those in favour?
Sorry, can you that's what's happening here? Are we voting for either?
Well, no, we're voting for OR.
It's up there.
I did a motion.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So are you happy with
You
that,
have
Tom?
two hands.
Yeah. If you could raise your right hand to be voting for OR, or against. The motion is lost. Councillor Goodwin, you're now going to move the either.
The either.
If we've got a second for the either, Councillor Nelson. Further discussion? Any further discussion? I'll put the motion then that for the either, all those in favour, please write your right hand. 2, 3, 4, 5, and Tom?
Yes.
That's 6. That motion is passed. We now move to the last two, which are 6 and 7. Notes that the revenue and financing policy and rates remission policy will take effect from 1 July 2025, and notes that staff will advise the council in early 2025 on the implementation of the charging approach. Somebody prepared to move that? Move Councillor Barrier. Seconded, Councillor Goodwin. Any discussion? Yes, Councillor Nelson.
So is this where when I was talking about before we come into play, so we move out another year?
No,
It's not related to that.
no, that vote's gone.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Okay, I'll put the motion at 6 and 7. Passed. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against?
Um,
Carried.
Just to say, if you had voted against in the first one, don't you need to vote against in the second one? No, in point 6?
You can change your vote.
No. I voted against that rates for emission policy, so theoretically I shouldn't vote for number 6.
Well,
Can you explain that?
You can change your vote. You get
Just a
yours.
note.
It's not changing
Just
your
a
mind,
vote.
it's just changing your vote.
Yeah,
Remember those great rules?
Okay.
So that's been passed. That is the end of the...
Sorry. We've just got a couple of comments from there's a little bit of a lack of clarity going on, sorry.
So recommendation 5B was agree a definition of financial hardship for the purposes of the rates to emission policy. So we'll just be wanting to seek council direction on that.
It's been passed, can we go back to it?
Won't you be working off what your criteria that you've got currently?
We don't currently have a criteria. It was put forward for feedback in the consultation.
So what are you saying, Steph?
Do we have to define, like, community service
Yeah, so
card
your preferred
was...
community service card, which was an option, it was just whether the council was able to,
It needs to be, Tom, you go first.
On
or
page
if it was a
13.
case-by-case approach.
Yeah, it's case by case, that's what I was just going to say. Page 13,
There was
a case by
options.
case approach could be used to identify patterns which could be used for more specific policies. So case by case would be fine, wouldn't it?
But we don't want to reinvent the wheel,
And we don't,
and we need a basis, like a community service.
and we don't want too much admin either.
No. Oh, Lord, keep it simple.
But it's not simple. Like, you could have any one of us around the table who don't have a community service card. Something could happen that would mean we need to apply for the remission. What was that, Bex?
You would end up with 7,000 people putting an application in because they've bought a new car and their water bill's
I'm
too
not
high.
talking about it could be anything. I could lose my job. Anything can happen that makes case by case relevant.
Maybe,
Sorry.
can I suggest we come back then with a definition? Make
Yeah.
it a little bit
Yeah.
easier.
Yeah, we could do that, yeah.
Yeah, so, because this won't take effect till...
Yeah, it won't take effect until July,
So we've got
yeah.
plenty of time.
Yeah.
We'll come back in
And
February.
we have passed that we agree a definition for violent hardship, so that's okay. Let's
We
cover
will
that now.
agree. Sorry,
Okay, look,
can I just clarify as well that in 5A, in the either, we've got agree, does not agree, and that was predicated on there being changes. So we're just clarifying that 5, the resolution is agrees to the key
yes.
proposed
Yes.
changes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got all that.
Pointing that out.
Got all that done.
It's quite clear, we agree to either.
Okay.
This is a bit of a